So just went through a run with this build, but let's go through a deeper dive with Ekko, talk a bit more about what relics we think will work with him well, what interactions are important. I haven't played as much Ekko as other characters, so there might be some things I'm missing, and if people know other builds that I miss here, I would love to hear about them, so please let me know if you have other builds that I am not aware of. But let's first take a look at his constellations and what sort of things we're going to be building around. So from his 2-star, you get created cards, cost 1 less. So relics and things that create cards are going to be really good for you, and making sure that you're able to basically play stuff out for cheaper. He also has, with his 3-star, when you see a unit in prediction, you get +2/+2 and a random keyword. So we're of course going to be wanting to look at his deck for what spells and other ways that we can get predictions and ways that we can make this happen more often so that we get more stats to units we see as well as keywords on them. This is a bit less powerful than a lot of other champions just because it's giving things to stuff in your deck rather than stuff on your board. And so it's a bit harder to scale up once you have stuff on your board. You're probably going to be wanting to replace things on your board. You have to spend that mana to get things back out. So it's, at least in my experience, a bit more difficult to scale him well. It takes a couple more turns before you have big units that you can drop and overwhelm your enemy. So we'll look at what we can do though to make this more reliable. The sorcery round start, so having more spell-based stuff. You're always going to have spell mana to spend, so making sure that the spells you have are going to be good and that you can use them regularly. We'll also look at those for build options. Of course, this makes some of the relics that we'll look at less valuable as well. The things that refill spell mana will often be less valuable just because we're generally have full spell mana. But yeah, we'll look at those. The 6-star you get when you see a unit in a prediction, you double its stats, so you can potentially see the same unit in predictions multiple times and double their stats more with that. So this can be really strong for just seeing things and really scaling them quickly. So again, like with the 2 or with the 3-star, your predictions here, it's a bit slower than stuff like, that scales your things on the board. So just be aware of that when you're playing him. From the bonus stars, things of note, your supporting champions get Guardian's Orb, which this will put epic items on 3 random cards in your deck. So this can be quite good, especially if you have a support champion that has some way of like recalling or something and going down multiple times. You can get lots of buffs on things in your deck or adding items to them. Spells you acquire in adventure have hand sensors, so this just buffs the top ally of your deck. This can be good, especially with when you're predicting, you're going to see things that are on top of your deck. When you're doubling stats or other things like that, this will help make sure that they get doubled more. Iterative Improvement, which is a spell that's in your starting deck, having Oracle Lens, so another way to predict, is also really good. Beyond that, just charging Sigil on Timewinder, so it does more damage. When you have this and you have your deck fully leveled up, I think it does, instead of 1 damage to 2 enemies, it does 5 to 2 enemies or an enemy on the Nexus. So decent removal. Let's see. So let's talk a bit about his relics and what's good on him. Important things to note with this he has from his character, strike, create a fleeting time trick in hand. So this is it's a spell in his deck, and it's a predict. So we're going to be looking at things that we can do to strike and get more time tricks. That's going to be good. Also, when his champion spell is this draw one, create a parallel convergence in your deck, and then you shuffle Ekko into your deck. So parallel convergence over here, this lets you start a free attack with an ephemeral copy of each ally. Because this is a created card, if you have his 2-star, this is reduced to 3 cost. Similar, when you level up, you shuffle, so you've predicted 4 times, then you create 3 chrono breaks in your deck. These allow you to revive all your dead allies and rally. So having things like this, where you create ephemeral copies of something, and then you can revive those ephemeral copies that died, and you can rally, you can potentially duplicate your board in that way. There's other ways to mess around with these sorts of things, and so we'll look at that with the relics as well. Let's quickly take a look at the ways he can predict currently in his deck. We mentioned from his bonus star, this ends up getting a predict, so we have 1 predict there. We have time trick, which we just talked about, also the spell that gets generated when he strikes. This is a way to predict. And then he has perfect perfectionist, another way to predict. You can also draft predicts as you go through, but starting out, he has those methods to predict, so not a whole lot in his deck. 3 out of like 10 things or something like that. So, maybe like 30% of his deck is able to have predicts. What is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? So actually, yeah, like 33% of his starting deck. So, but then it depends on once you add another champion and other stuff that you're drafting. If it doesn't have predicts, that percentage goes down pretty rapidly. So yeah, it can, if you're able to strike and whatnot with him regularly, you can get your level up pretty fast. But if you are not able to attack in or do other things, it can be difficult. So with the relics we have here, some of the cool interactions that are worthy of note. Death's Foil can be nice just because, first of all, you can attack in with him and you don't have to worry about him dying. So you'll be able to get that strike. You get the time trick in your hand. What's also nice is copies you generate from like parallel convergence. When you use this, if Ekko's on the board, the ephemeral copy will attack in and it will not die when it hits. And so you'll be able to, if you have like the attack token and you use parallel convergence first, you can then attack in again with both the original Ekko and the ephemeral copy that you created, so you can get more strikes that way with Ekko, which is very nice. That's a good interaction. If you do want him to die, however, then you wouldn't want this. If you want to, leverage more of the chrono break, then yeah, he won't die, so you won't get a permanent copy of him when you chrono break. So there are some drawbacks to that as well. It depends on how you want to deal with this interaction. So that can be pretty good. If you don't have this, again, you want to be able to strike with him and get attacks in. So having some form of challenger is generally good. So using Chosen by the Stars, reasonable. It's pretty easy to get him up to. This, you are playing a lot of created cards. You don't really, by default in your deck, have ways of targeting him with any spells in your deck unless you draft things that target him. But you can get enough off this augment to get him up to being able to challenge. That might just take a little bit more time. Also getting the overwhelm with him is pretty nice. So this is okay. I wouldn't say it's best, but it's decent. You can always get Challenger from full build, which is also good. Wouldn't particularly recommend Deadly Harpoon for him, but it's certainly an option. Hand of Noxus, another good way to get Challenger. Then, of course, Laurent Blade Rack, as well as just the Grand Duelist Blade. Either of these decent options for Challenger. He has quick attack, so as long as they have weak enemies on their board, you should be able to attack in with him, get that strike, and make sure that you're able to generate the time trick so you can get more predicts off. Other ways to strike, you can use Stalker's Blade, or potentially multiple Stalker's Blades. This will allow you to generate more copies of this. They'll be by default 1 cost to do that. When you level him up, the strike, it creates a 0 cost time trick, so they'll become free, but he has to be leveled for that to happen. So if you've already predicted 4 times when you drop him, or if you have, ways to have him resummoned, so if you have like a Guardian Angel or something like that, when he pops out of the Guardian Angel, he'll strike again, so you can leverage this to get more strikes. Also keeps him safer. Definitely options for being able to generate more of those predicts and be able to use them. You can use something like the Deck of Destiny. This will create created cards in your deck that you can draw. They'll be essentially free, or actually no, they'll be 1 cost. Normally they're 2 costs, so for this, play a Destiny card, but because he gets the reduced cost, they'll be 1 cost. If you're using Searing Brilliance, you can potentially hit this as well. He doesn't scale particularly well with spell power, so I wouldn't say this is the strongest. This doesn't have any predict stuff with it, so but if you want it, it is an option there. Echoing Spirit, I think, is really good with him, both because it creates copies of him in the deck, which are considered created cards. So that means that instead of 4 cost, the created versions of him will be 3 cost. It also reduces the cost of his champion spell, and these will be considered created. So you can get 0 cost called shots for the created copies of him that are in the deck once he's on the board. So you can just cycle those. Every time you draw an Echo, you're just playing it for free, or playing the called shot for free, shuffling more Paralleled Convergence into your deck, making it higher chance that you're going to see those in predictions and be able to pull them out. So I think Echoing Spirit's a really good option for him. If you don't have Echoing Spirit, again, you can always use Chameleons. This is basically a weaker version of Echoing Spirit, but it creates copies of him that are considered created cards in your deck, and you can leverage those instead of Echoing Spirit. Other things here. Overwhelm, always reasonable if you're going to end up with a decently sized board. So, using Cruel Experiments or Beast Within, things like that. I think those are certainly worthwhile, especially when you're generating, tacking in with the whole board from Parallel Convergence, being able to overwhelm the enemy reasonably strong there. So I would say getting some form of overwhelm is worthwhile. A lot of my builds don't have a form of overwhelm in them, and sometimes he struggles to get through the damage when I've played him with that, so just be aware of that. This Emotional Support Bear is a created card, and it costs 2 less, so effectively, rather than a 6 cost, you'd have a 3 cost 10/10 that you can drop. I would say that's reasonable, but not something to really build your deck around per se. You can also further duplicate Tibbers with Practical Perfectionist. I would say that's something that's more of like a just fun to mess around with build rather than like a best in slot build, but just something you can be aware of, that this will be cheaper from the created card stuff. and yeah, will be decent. Something you can do, I guess, with this is if you're, because this is 3 cost, if you use Found Fortune with this, Ekko will then draw you. Sorry, still recovering from a cold. So Ekko will draw you either the Emotional Support Bear or the Practical Perfectionist. So that's great. I would say Found Fortune, even without the Emotional Support Bear, just by itself, with being able to always get that Practical Perfectionist and have it be 0 cost. That way you can toss him down, toss down another Predict, duplicate stuff from your deck. Really strong. I would highly recommend using this if you have Found Fortune. Good way to get tempo and get more stuff in your deck. More Predicts going. Frozen Tomb, also reasonable if you just want to get an Ekko out there, if you don't have other ways to sort of make sure that you get Ekko. This is a way to do it. I wouldn't say this is extremely strong, but if you do want to somehow end up with multiple copies of Ekko on the board, this is also a way to help you do that. You can drop him before he pops out of the Frozen Tomb, and then have multiple copies to strike with and attack with and whatnot. So you can do something like this with the Double Stalker's Blade as well. That way, when you drop him, you get some copies, and then when he pops out of this, you also get some copies, and then you can get the level up from those Predicts. That should be reasonable. I might have mentioned earlier, about the spell mana. Because you get your spell mana refilled if you have that 4-star, some things like Hidden Tome and whatnot will probably be less impactful for you. You can make sure that you spend your mana before you play him or your supporting champion and get that mana refill, but that's probably going to be a bit more difficult. I would say this has less value than most like spell-based champions, just because he automatically gets that mana refill. Similarly, things like Archangel's Staff are completely worthless on him, whereas most spell-based champions, that would be really good. Let's see. This also creates cards, but these are already 0. I wouldn't particularly recommend this unless you're using like Chosen by the Stars. Then it can be pretty good. You can always target him with it. That gives you, something to target, beef up his attack, with the Challenger and all that. Yeah, that's just a reasonable combo. Portal Pals also created card, so rather than just being reduced by 4, it'll get reduced by 5, the 7+ cost units, so they'll still cost mana, but yeah, they will be cheaper. Similar with Oath of Guardians, these are also created cards, so if you're using Oath plus the Star Gems, or at least 1 Star Gem. Too many things with star in the name. Here we go. So this would reduce the cost of the created copies by 5. So and this by 3. So you can always run something else here, like an Echoing Spirit. Make sure you have enough copies of him to get him out earlier. Also make him 3 cost, so you can get him out cheaper, then toss out some more champions. That would be a reasonable build to run with. Let's continue here. I'm just looking at rares. We'll go more into the rares in just a moment. So more created cards. Searing Brilliance. This I was using on my build with him. He does have Predicts on 2 of the 3 spells in his base deck. So this can be good for getting more copies of Predicts in your deck. Also, one of the spells is the spell he generates when he strikes. So if you hit that with Searing Brilliance, That'll mean the ones you get from the strike will also be free rather than one cost, and they will draw you 2 cards instead of 1. Also, if they hit the 1 cost spell that like duplicates a follower, and it will be 0 cost instead of 1 cost, and it has a predict to it, so you'll get a predict draw, which is really nice. So I would say Searing Brilliance really strong with him. I would generally cut the other spell that does not have predict if you're using Searing Brilliance. That way you're more guaranteed to get those predicts and be able to run with those. Scales of Judgment, also an option in terms of getting strikes with him. I would say Stalker's Blade is better with him. That way if you summon him in any way without playing him, you'll still get the strikes, whereas this only is a play effect. So I would generally say use Stalker's Blade, not Scales of Judgment, even if you have Scales of Judgment. This is also a created card. I wouldn't say this is really strong, but it will be a 3 cost Evelyn that's in your hand. There is the common combo that can be used of being able to refill your spell mana each turn by leveling up Evelyn. So if you spend your spell mana, level up Evelyn, you can get your spell mana again, cast more spells, things like that. That can be okay, but I haven't messed around with that on him myself. But in my experience, drawing my spells and getting enough spells in my hand is more of a difficulty than spending all my spell mana. So refilling my spell mana would seem to have less value to me. But certainly if you can get stuff like the blue buff on him where he refills his mana on strike, that can be really good. Just because, you essentially spend your mana, you use like your parallel convergence or things like that, and then that'll refill, and then you can potentially cast another parallel convergence or another chrono break, and then refill afterwards. So being able to like refill after an attack or something, absolutely fantastic. But if you're not able to refill mid-round after attack, it's a bit more difficult. So you might be able to make it work with the Evelyn and the level up combo. You just wait to level her up until after you've attacked in or something like that. And then you get your mana refill, and then you can reload, do it again. That could potentially work. But yeah, I haven't, like I said, I haven't messed around with that too much, just some potential there. I don't think a lot of potential around Starforged Gauntlets with him. You'd have to get him to like 8 attacks, so that would use up all your relic slots to get there. You can certainly do it. Use something like the Darius relic. What is it? Hand of Noxus. There we go. And then use something like, I don't know, Champion's Purse. Champion's Purse, this does have the created cards also. This creates coins whenever you kill stuff. So you could do something like this. It sort of relies on them having a weak enough board that you can kill their units, generate those coins, and then use those coins to regenerate mana and such. But you have to kill them in combat. You can't just strike them in other ways to make that happen, to generate more coins. But this would be a way to get Starforged going. But I would say it's a bit more difficult for him to get this. Is a lot of investment just to get 1 extra mana gem per turn. I think focusing more on his spells and other created cards is probably going to net you better results. I think that's most of the epic relic stuff here. So yeah, we already talked about Overwhelm a little bit, so this is good. There is the Taker's Poe, which has this ephemeral allies can't take damage or die. This will have that same interaction that we talked about with Parallel Convergence. Sort of a problem with this, though, is if you already have a full board, then yeah, it pretty much has no value. All the ephemeral stuff, when you do the Parallel Convergence, will just poof anyway, because it won't be able to come back to your board. But if you do have like a half full board or something like that, you use parallel convergence, then those attack in, and then you can attack in with them again if you have a token, but also keep in mind if they don't die, then you can't resurrect them with Chrono Break. So yeah, there's some synergy, but also some anti-synergy with this. The same with using the Death's Foil. Just be aware of those interactions. Now, let's take a look more at the rare relics and builds that we can do around rare relics. Typical for spell stuff, Chemtech duplication can be fine. I don't find this necessary on him. Typically, you're able to predict and draw enough with just single stuff where you can keep it going pretty well. But if you do find yourself getting up to like the 6 mana range, this is certainly an option. This is actually a character where Scout can be reasonable. The reason being, when you're seeing, like, if you're using, say, Echoing Spirit. Oops, we have it on filtered. I should just take that filter off. So if let's say we're using Echoing Spirit and like Death's Foil or something. So what we can do here is you attack in with him, you generate some of these fleeting time tricks, then you attack in a second time, you get another fleeting time trick in your hand, and you use those to predict. You see, because you have tons of copies of Ekko in your deck, you see those copies, they get the +2 and a keyword, and you, if you have his 6-star, you double his stats, and then he will get shuffled back into your deck. So if you pick up one of those ones from a prediction, that means in a future turn you can just play him out, and he will have, you know, those huge stats. You can attack in with him and whatnot. So unfortunately, when he does get shuffled back into your deck, it'll, you know, sort of reset his stats. So yeah, that, you know, there's both some synergy and anti-synergy there, but normally, you know, all these copies that you're seeing in predictions that are getting buffed up, unless Ekko dies somehow, you don't have a way to, you know, really play him back out. So you can use Gale Force to do a sort of repeated shuffle and get the bigger copies of him out there. So that is a possibility. Again, I haven't messed around with that too much, but just so you're aware that can be done. Guardian Angel, really good with him, especially, like we said, with Stalker's Blade. Similar with Guardian's Orb, if you summon him, or potentially are summoning him multiple times, getting more epic items on there. This can be a way to even get like Scout and stuff like that on him if you are dropping him multiple times, especially with created copies. He isn't the cheapest champion, though. You know, 4 cost is decently expensive. If you do have created copies of him, though, in your deck, then, you know, they will be 3 cost rather than 4 cost. So there are ways to make it easier to play him out. Kind of interesting, this Guardian's Trinket. For some reason, these do not count as created champions, even though they're sort of created. It just adds a random champion to your deck with epic items, but these will not get reduced cost. At least that's the case from when I've done things with like a Relic Soul and such. These do not count as created cards. So you might think that this is will work with his stuff, but I don't believe it will. Hymn of Valor, this is a created card, so this will also be a 2 cost, double your stats, which can be quite good. If you especially have ways to drop Ekko multiple times, or, you know, use Guardian Angel to have him be resurrected, and then you can, you know, beef up a unit, especially if you've dropped already a big unit from something, or if you're using like Chemtech Duplicator. Yeah, all of these are reasonable options for being able to get multiple redoubled valors, and then, you know, once you double something a couple times, it's going to become absolutely massive. So that's certainly a possibility. Then Nothing really around spell power for him. We already talked about Challenger. Already talked about Star Gem. This is another way to strike if you don't feel like using Stalker's Blade, or if they don't have any units on the board. You can always, have him strike the enemy Nexus instead multiple times. Guaranteed way to generate those time tricks and be able to do that. This can also work with if you're, using Echoing Spirit and you're seeing big copies of him. You might want him to die. That way you can drop one of the bigger ones that you've, doubled their stats a bunch of times. You drop him on the board. He strikes the Nexus multiple times for a ton of damage. Sort of like what you're trying to do with the Ash build, if you're aware of that. It's sort of a similar principle where you're just, beefing up your echoes by seeing them in predictions, and then you can drop him and have him strike the Nexus multiple times. You get more predicts. But yeah, then you'll have to find a way to sort of remove him. If you have a full board, you can just sort of like replace him with a follower and then drop a new one. Yeah, but you would typically want to do this with something like Echoing Spirit again. That's, that way you have more copies of him that you can see in predictions and then drop those because they will be bigger. So, Deceiver's Crest, I wouldn't say particularly strong. Being able to get copies of him and shuffle. So if you don't have Echoing Spirit, this is a good way to get his champion spell. These will be created versions because they're created cards, so they will cost one less. So yeah, that should be good. If you do have Echoing Spirit, you can also make that 0 cost, so you can guarantee that you're getting more copies of him shuffled into your deck, and you're being able to generate more parallel convergences in your deck, find those and attack in. So this can be reasonable for him. Yeah, if you want to get him out early on, you can always do the Scourge's Stash or the Packed Powder. So Packed Powder, there's always the sort of Swain combination here. So Swain's Raven Army. This would allow you to play him out for free on turn 1. Get him out there. Or you want to play him for 2, you can always just use one of these and then have another relic in here to substitute in. So always an option for cheating out a lower cost champion on turn 1. That can be quite good for him. I wouldn't say particularly strong because you can make him 3 cost with created copies of him. If you have his 5-star mana gem, you can play him on turn 1 anyway. But yeah, just be aware that if you want to cheat him out for even cheaper, you can. Troll King's Crown, Source of Overwhelm, always a good option for things that are building up their deck. You are getting a lot of random keywords on your characters as you see them in predictions. So if you want to just keep one Echo on your board and not have him replaced or anything and get him beefed up with more keywords, you can trigger Evolve pretty easily, and you can, as those creatures die, get him stuff. I wouldn't say there's a particular build around, but there is some reasonable interaction with his deck on this. Only other things from the common side, I would say, general Spell Shield, always good for protecting your champion. Again, Lost Chapter I don't think has as much value, just because you always get your mana refilled if you have his 4-star. If you don't have his 4-star, then yes, this absolutely will be quite good. Then anything when you have Quick Attack Challenger, always a great combo. Chameleon's Necklace, we already talked about, created cards costing less. You can potentially use multiple of these if you need to get more copies of him in your deck and have the copies you find be cheaper. I don't know why this is stuck here now. There we go. Yeah, I think that's mostly about it. Again, if you guys have other builds that you know of that you think would be good on him that I'm not aware of, I would love to hear it, because I sometimes struggle a bit with this character. I think this build works decently, I was able to get through like 6.5 star adventures with this, but it's not as smooth as I would like. So I'm thinking I'm going to mess around a bit more with stuff like Found Fortune to help guarantee that I get those predictions, and see if I can find ways to make him a bit more consistent, because I was certainly struggling with sometimes if I didn't draw my spells, I was really having a hard time getting the engine rolling. So hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one.